Welcome to the Feisworld Podcast, engaging conversations that cross the boundaries between business, art, and the digital world.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. This is Fei Wu, your host for the Feisworld Podcast. Welcome to episode number 19. If you're new to my podcast, welcome, and hope you subscribe and stay in touch today. Feisworld Podcast is a platform where I ignite unsung heroes from every day and every walk of life. I hope they inspire you in a way that's relatable so that you could do it too. Myself included. Yes, it means that you can also start a podcast today. Good news is that I will be starting a new chapter on facworld.com where I share my process of starting and sustaining a podcast and some of the products I use as well. I welcome you to listen in, submit your feedback, and let me know the types of questions, podcast guests you would like to hear from next. My guest today is Bob Goodman. We met at Arnold Worldwide in Boston, where he served as the SVP, Director of User Experience. I had the pleasure to work with Bob on a few projects. I witnessed his stellar facilitation skills and user experience approach to various business challenges. Inviting Bob to my show was triggered by a constant thought in my mind when working with him. I always wished to carry a recorder so I could capture his speech and thinking process for tackling difficult situations completely at ease. I also admire his leadership and management philosophy. Bob always had others' best interests in mind without insisting on his own ideas and methodologies, and he's never too quick to jump to conclusions. In this 40-minute interview, you'll find out about what is UX, or user experience, what has contributed to the rapid growth of UX, and why UX has been recognized as a critical discipline across multiple industries, such as advertising, software development, product companies. How can one fresh out of school start or even consider UX as a career path? What are the common challenges associated with UX and how Bob advises you to tackle them strategically and emotionally? How has UX been integrated in advertising agencies and the type of activities and opportunities associated with the domain? If you're listening to this episode on your iPhone or Android phones, make sure to pay a visit to my website, that is facworld.com, Feisworld, where you can find show notes, other tools, and resources. Thank you so much for being my audience. Without further ado, please welcome Bob Goodman. To starting this conversation, I've given our audience a very brief intro of who you are, sort of painting a 360 picture of you in 30 seconds or a minute. Do you mind providing an update of where you are now and what you're really excited about?
Sure. So I am Experience Design / Creative Director here at Mullen, which is a new role that I just started. Nice. Really excited about it. But in general, I've been doing user experience design as a practitioner and or as a kind of manager director, really both in tandem for many years, but about 15 years kind of in the UX industry, if you want to call it that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really enjoy thinking about kind of users and consumers and how they might come at a product or service or platform. Mm-hmm. Also branding in terms of how the idea of a brand and its narrative actually interacts with end users, and how it can be kind of most relevant and useful to them. Mm-hmm. And I've done this kind of work as a consultant and also with startups, and I was at Microsoft for a while, and then also at different advertising agencies who were thinking about and working hard on digital experience and digital offerings.
Mm-hmm. So for part of my audience who might not be as familiar with UX, user experience design, with the role it plays in an agency setting. How would you explain that? I find them to be challenging a lot of the times, but I think many of us are overthinking the definition.
Definitely. So I guess, first of all, I guess the way I think of user experience design is an approach to kind of design, technology, and people that tries to make things useful, usable, and engaging. Mm-hmm. Those are some of the qualities. Sometimes people swap a different word for the word engaging, like delightful, impactful, compelling. Mm-hmm. You can choose your own adjective. And I think of it as a practice that goes back to late 60s, early 70s, kind of a commercial perspective on what's sometimes called human-computer interaction, and ideas that were kicking around really at the dawn of personal computing, especially in the West Coast at places like Xerox PARC. But I think it really took hold as a more sort of mainstream profession, with really like the explosion of mobile and smartphones. And so it's a kind of confusing discipline because people think it's maybe graphic design, and it's really starts more with, to my mind, with architecture, like blueprints and flows and mapping user understanding and business strategy into that. So people might think it's graphic design, or they might think it's development, like programming, and it really isn't. That's really, to my mind, best left to people that are like experts in that, or people think that, or that people think that it's just like web design. Or people think it's just research, or people think it's just strategy. So it's tough because it's a kind of its own hybrid discipline, and it's kind of young itself as well. And then when you take it into ad agencies, to get back to your initial question, it's a challenge of the practice because at ad agencies it means something also maybe a little different, because generally the kind of design considerations and aesthetics and kind of quality and tone of voice, these are thought of as kind of purely part of a creative practice within an ad agency. But I think what's happened as agencies really expanded their mission and their remit, what they're asked to do by their clients, it kind of goes beyond, let's say, traditional storytelling, or beyond, television campaigns, or beyond campaigns in general, and it starts to say, how are we like engaging consumers in a way that's really relevant to them and lets them contribute in a two-way conversation.
It's an area I always think about that it's been around for many, many years. As you mentioned, it's a concept that's already been there in the 60s and 70s, possibly earlier. And then I remember the agency I was with at the time in 08 or 2010, it has become an official domain. And there was an announcement about it. There's hiring associated with it. What do you think is the trigger for really explicitly calling it UX, or user experience design? And now there are even CXO, Chief User Experience Officer, involved.
Yeah, and there can be a lot of clutter and confusion to like the terms and the kind of tags and like overlap. So I guess I think the reason that agencies, why they are excited about it or why it's useful, I think in part before that we saw, Silicon Valley really embracing this and startup really embracing this. So the technology firms really like innovating through UX design. And certainly I think, people think of Apple as a place that is sort of passionate about the end experience, however they get there and whatever the roles are. And so I think that also what feels like the complexity of technology and its pervasiveness and ubiquity kind of sparked conversations about the new demands to be really useful and have the best impact for clients. I think that brought agencies to really think about this. And I think also just kind of success stories, it really can be like a really great bridging discipline that like unlocks, the investment and equity that like agencies already have. And, our partners, want, user experience design or customer experience design, or they want like holistic thinking brought to bear on their challenges. And in many cases, they're trying to have that in-house, but also get to that kind of like a service approach from their, from their agencies. I guess another thing is just attention. Like it's an attention economy, and people's attentions are, on their applications and on their phones. And so, and it's not necessarily always that easy to simply kind of buy their attention. So you have to kind of earn their attention by understanding them and designing things that are useful. So that creates a new kind of set of challenges. If I haven't kind of like, paid to receive your attention for a fixed time via like via an ad unit, then I really have to understand what you just choose of your own free will to interact with and stick with in some way. And then users are also their own media channels, right? Like they're media. If you have a network of 2,000 friends and you're choosing what you're going to share and how you're going to share it, it's up to you, and so I kind of have to earn your decision to like share or advocate something as well.
One of the themes I realized that one of the discoveries I have with my podcast is sharing a certain set of information, and also discover, to your point, through my social networks, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, to find out what people are really interested in hearing. So instead of leaving one of the questions towards the end, I think one of my favorite people to answer this question is UX really helps solve many different types of problems and offer different solutions. We'll get into that. But I believe part of my audience is already thinking that how do I get into UX? So twofold. One is someone's fresh out of school. And you mentioned architecture. And I actually realized a lot of my friends who used to be architects got naturally maneuver their way into UX. And so maybe we'll address that. Like, what is the personality type, the set of skills, and what would you seek in that 20 to 23-year-old person to see if there might be a good fit for your team or for someone else's UX team?
Definitely. I think that there are like a lot of soft skills, and then there's like a set of kind of craft or more hard skills. And I think that there's a lot of demand and opportunity for it, but there's also a lot of clutter and confusion, about it. And I guess I think of the core similarly to Caleb, who had the pleasure of being part of being on the same team with Caleb for a long time. So we're referencing back to a previous podcast. Caleb mentioned the information architecture part of UX, and definitely I think that's to me kind of at the heart of it. And the information architecture is, a set of like a way of thinking about information architecture and mapping and spaces, that involves things like how are parts of an experience like categorized, or how are they visualized, and how do you offer people choices, and at what level of depth. And what is the information that's supportive, and what's interaction that gets them where they need to go, and how do they navigate in this space, and how do they understand it as a cohesive product or service, or even how does it positively influence their perception of the brand that's offering the product or service. And so the person trying to work in that space, there's a range of just UX deliverables that like I personally look for in portfolios, and and it isn't just what we'd call like comps. It isn't just kind of pixel perfect deliverables, but things like wireframes, annotations, basically like a black and white or shades of gray schematics, where initially the visual, let's say, flair or substance are on purpose de-emphasized to go to kind of core ideas. and things like flow documents that show like where a user is in a series of steps, that shows kind of like different logic or like interconnections in systems, and and talking to someone that from my previous team was coming out of an actual architecture background. They had some interesting terms from that domain. There was like the rendering diagram that really conjured the whole building that you were trying to build, and then there were more of the engineering diagrams or even like the HVAC system. And to my mind, we don't have terms that are that clear, but the final visual design that came from generally created in something like Photoshop, maybe Illustrator, that looked pixel perfect. That's kind of the rendering, but that's really like an end stage kind of deliverable often. Up until that run, there was a lot of things that the documents and drawings that were maybe a little more rough, and it might even be a sketch that was like all the kind of beneath the iceberg thought work that led up to that.
I had the pleasure, Bob, I had the pleasure to work with many people you've hired on the team I'm working on now. I've discovered many interesting learnings as me as a project manager, one of which is I love the fact that the people we ended up interviewing and hiring are really good at storytelling. So in addition to the artifacts and their portfolio, they're able to articulate, as we go through the pages of this is my thinking process. And some of them are quite young and they're very comfortable with people. And there's one I can recall that, for instance, worked at Apple, very comfortable with dealing with customers. And I think that storytelling process is really important. And I think that is part of soft skills. I also love the fact that you didn't just hire people into a very specific vertical sector to say you have to come from, you have to be an architect, you have to be a designer, you have to be a copywriter. You hired into, there's one I can think of was a software developer. So somebody can say that's kind of a hodgepodge, but somehow every time I come to you to solve many different problems we're dealing with, you can pinpoint to say this person is really good with that, and of course considering their time. Why do you think you had such a vision, which I have to say is very different than many of the other people I met on the leadership team?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it does sort of relate to your earlier question, like what's a good way in. I'm definitely, I guess, in terms of hiring. So I am looking for, craft, like on the kind of deliverables I mentioned, or at least a strong scent of information that someone would be excited about those kinds of deliverables and have like the skills to do them. But then there's a set of more like attributes or qualities that I think are really helpful as a UX person. And I think because you're kind of flung into many different situations and have to try and make sense of them, situations which are not fully framed but kind of semi-framed or just completely unframed. And you're thrust into those situations, and then you have to kind of like problem solve and like at a pretty like rapid pace, and also be willing to take the risk of like showing someone like a rough like sketch or some rendering of your understanding fed back to them to sort of confirm or advance the project in a very speculative or investigatory way. And that's just a kind of straw man deliverable to at least advance the conversation. Because of those realities, then some of the attributes I guess that I look for is someone that's like a pretty like really excited to learn and be constantly learning, and have kind of built up their own ways to like get up learning ramps quickly and courageously.
So regardless where they're coming from, men or women, I think it was a really long way for me to say that you are very open-minded. You're a very open-minded leader. And one attribute about you, I'm not sure if you realize that, and one of the attributes I really love most about you is you somehow help demystify, user experience as a domain. So what I mean by that is, instead of creating a silo or to say, these are the only situations you can approach us, we are the smartest team in the entire agency, right? Look at us. Or shine a light on a particular person, where in this case was never yourself, but is a domain. It's, for me, it's encouraging everybody else around you to learn. So, obviously, I think it'll be, it's a very truthful statement coming out of me, and I really want my audience to hear that about you, how much you really care about your team, and I think you provided and really build a platform to enable them to do their very best, and to encourage them to continue to learn and help other learning. It sounds really trivial to you, and I look at you right now, and you're just like, that's just part of my natural process.
Just thinking about. Thank you very much. I definitely appreciate that. That compliment. That means a lot, and that means a lot. More to me that someone said, I really liked that wireframe you're building. Someone said, you really enabled the team to contribute at their best, or enabled other people to think about things from a UX perspective. Mm-hmm. And I guess one reason that I really appreciate your comments is that if we say that the experience is not just driven by a UX discipline, but ultimately you want a kind of a shared vision and some kind of collective ownership of that vision by the team. Mm-hmm. And really, invariably, the process and the team's ideas are kind of what is shaping the experience for the end user. Mm-hmm. And that takes a lot of different disciplines and stakeholders to do. Then the UX team or practitioners are really just modeling some ways to think about it. Mm-hmm. That people from other disciplines would embrace or use. Mm-hmm. from their own lens. Mm-hmm. So I think there are, and that's how I try and I aspire to solve some of the contradictions of the idea of a practice for something that should be broadly owned. Mm-hmm. If the customer experience is inclusive, is really being delivered by the entire team. Mm-hmm. People that have a business background, people that have an account background, people that have a development background, and people that have a UX background. Mm-hmm. And UXers are maybe trying to take the best thinking from the team and kind of harness it. Mm-hmm. in a direction and provide some vision or perspective on it. Mm-hmm. And then the way to do that is to try and be sufficiently open-minded and bridging and nimble. Mm-hmm. That you're attuned to ideas from outside your own. You're not mm-hmm. you're not simply you're not simply an advocate for your own perspective. Mm-hmm. And at times you might have less of a product perspective, less is what the product you're doing, more of a process perspective. Mm-hmm. So you might say, well, I'm still forming my perspective mm-hmm. on what a product should do, but process-wise, I think we need to work more closely together, or people need to work more faster, or mm-hmm. we should be sketching this, or we should be agreeing to the terms by which we're describing these things. Mm-hmm. And so I guess that's the kind of, I try and sort of practice what I preach. I'm mm-hmm. looking for people that can also kind of do that mm-hmm. in a nimble, open-minded way. Mm-hmm. Kind of know when they're being a product advocate versus a process advocate, mm-hmm. Or at least be able to kind of quickly kind of toggle between mm-hmm. roles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Empathy. I think empathy is one attribute, as you are describing as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. One of the things I learned the most from you is empathy, not only towards users, but oftentimes towards clients as well. Without mentioning the client's name, I remember working with you on the project, and while all the other UX designers are, really overloaded, overworked, and you really stepped up and say, Faye, how can I help? That was a project. Honestly, I probably shouldn't have leveraged someone nearly at your level, your position, and clearly you're also very busy. But as you were discussing wires and the approach with a client, and you were extremely patient, and I think you literally over and over again provided them with the most friendly one-on-one UX approach, and the client really appreciated that. On a level, I honestly did not have I couldn't imagine myself having the patience for that. And in my mind, I was getting a little frustrated because I had the preconception to think, we're in 2014. Who has not heard of user experience? Who has not seen wireframes? But you had so much empathy for them, and in a way that they instantly related to you, and hence made the rest of the project flow like magic, And I just want to call that out, and I'm not sure if empathy is something that you also consider as part of your practice. It's something that you remind your team of as well.
Oh, thank you. I guess if we think of like this user experience, these ideas, then we don't just have like end users of systems or services, but we have internal users, within a company, employee users that are using systems of the agency and trying to work well together. Our clients are they're users of our process by which we're trying to advocate or deliver or partner, and different ways of coming at this. And so so there's this sort of meta level, there's this meta thing going on that you're trying to deliver end user experience, but have the actual working process also be a good experience for everyone involved. And that's pretty hard because you have a lot of different points of view in the room, and different language and different experience that people are bringing to the table. And so I think it's important that there's enough kind of room for people to either say what they're thinking, bring their ideas to light, on a whiteboard if they're so inclined to pick up and sketch something. Mention past experiences they have that might be relevant, or not. If they don't want to do that and they really just are more comfortable with you delivering, and they'll tell you what's working, what isn't. That's okay too.
That's I realize that you always welcome people to provide you with feedback, whether it's people way less experienced than you are, or even directly from the client. And during presentation or even a conversation, just like you had mentioned for the UX approach and the philosophy that you promote a two-way conversation, which that's one of the key takeaways. Learning from you, of course, I welcome more opportunities to continue that journey as well. We'll get to, let me just dive in a little bit more. I have one more question related to UX is, what are some of the common UX challenges that you've seen today? And some of that, one I observed, as I'm learning, I shouldn't be answering my own question, but for instance, one that you brought up earlier is a lot of the times the problems are not really well defined or not defined at all. I don't know which one is worse, honestly. And how do you insert yourself as part of that solution? And also, it's been tough to have a dedicated UX resource to stay on the course of a project throughout, even though it's an ideal situation. So oftentimes you are challenged with the consequences and repercussions way later on in the project, during development or after launching. So I think what I articulate is 5% of the challenges. What have you seen so far, and what are some of the quick tips, I guess, to kind of overcome that?
Let's see.
Too many.
Okay, yeah. So the second part was we had a question about a process conversation about and then there was the nature of the problem that one's trying to work on. Yeah, I mean, to my mind, generally in in something that maybe is what you might think of as like a big UX or just starts to be more like design thinking, there's an issue of like the framed versus unframed like challenges. And I think that the things that whether it's clearly like a briefed in situation or not, I think that oftentimes like an unframed opportunity arrives in a framed package, and then and then something that is actually like framed, like an opportunity to framing arrives in an unframed package. So I think it's kind of you have to be kind of open to the idea that something that looks like one could really be another. And it'd probably be good. So it's maybe I'm putting it very abstract, so it'd be good. I'll try and think of like some examples of where this is the case. But basically, I think it's important if people like raced too quickly to a solution, either internally or externally, to see if more space could be opened up to come at it from different directions, and to allow what you might say is some time for like divergent thinking, if things converge really quickly. And divergent thinking can make people nervous because they feel it's like messy and cluttered, and they feel it feels kind of like bottomless, and we don't know like how or when it will like converge. And usually the thing that makes it converge is simply like a time pressure, like it has to converge by X, right? But I think also like if there's there's some UX facilitation, then even the divergent things you're kind of taking stock, seeing what's overlap, like outputting some putting pen to paper like sooner rather than later. So there's prematurely kind of convergent thinking that didn't allow like a divergent process that could kind of like unframe an overly framed thing, or that's just kind of just about creativity in my mind. And then the maybe the like excessively like divergent thinking when there actually is a clear challenge in place, the kind of missing the what's at the core of the challenge, and actually you need like the solutions to like really move in that direction clearly, instead of just like kind of like batting your head against the wall. That can happen too. So yeah, I feel like a lot of that is kind of like getting in a flow of being like flexible, but also like pragmatic at the same time. Yeah.
Is it possible to paint part of the picture? And I think there are, again, consequences and maybe associated, but perhaps there are opportunities where UX could come in and paint part of the picture and leverage several tools, or perhaps that's patience and time, to tell a story around possibilities and filling the gap. Do you think that may be one of the approaches that people could take on?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is one thing is like working in like small groups, and the group, there may be like it may be like there's clearly some like comfort scale of like fruitful group work that's like bigger than 2 and smaller than 20. It's more depending on like the people in the room. But I think the idea of trying to like surface the best ideas, like try and like organize them. To my mind, it's different than just an open-ended brainstorm, but it's trying to bring some structure and some scaffolding to the situation. So I think that in terms of like the facilitation role of like UX is very helpful. That's how I personally like to kick off projects. Is more of what I'd call like a working session. There are other models that are more like kind of waterfallish, to use like a software process term, that's more like let's brief everyone in and then we'll all like kind of disperse to our separate corners. So I think that like as far as like the UX process, that's very helpful. And then if you are going to be the person that is actively like converging the divergent thinking because you've had everyone's input and you took stock and then now you're trying to shape it more as the architect with a product vision, and you're trying to put forward your theory, at least for people to like bounce off of or like react to, that also kind of like advances or leapfrogs things. And I think it's a very different like approach than, simply more of a solo player or practitioner, or like someone that's doing maybe like artistic work where it really makes sense for them to just simply really someone that's like share understanding quickly, and then to try and take some architectural work, but for the purpose of like another facilitation, like iteratively or progressively, and working like kind of like fast and like rough at progressive levels of fidelity. So I mean, to go back to your earlier point of like UX comes in like at a later point, it's not necessarily enabled to play these roles that I mentioned. It may be more functional then. It may be small UX. It may be just like, okay, there's really time to refacilitate. There isn't time to reframe. It's already really, the idea is already really out there. It really just needs to be like polished up. We need to close some gaps or like see where it's kind of broken and fix it. And it's more really like, I'm just a practitioner. Here's my expert perspective. Here's how I do to solve it. X, Y, and Z. That's important too. And there are plenty of situations where that's exactly the right constrained set of tools.
I find it very helpful when somebody like yourself is leading a team that you've been working in user experience for a long time, so you're able to offer very tactical solution, set of tools and resources to people who are learning from you. I really like that aspect, and in particular, I personally have been very impressed with your facilitation, how you conduct a workshop, and you never frame, you never corner yourself into thinking these are the things you've conducted before. I think you challenge yourself as well as your team to think outside of the box, find a better box, and to be slightly uncomfortable so all of us can continue this learning. We had this very brief conversation right before a agency speech. I think it's called a full agency town hall, we had this like 1 minute conversation about your upbringing, and I always assumed that you were a teacher at a previous life of yours. But turns out your parents are professors. I know we're doing a 180-degree dive here, trying to respect your time. We have about 10 minutes left.
That's good.
So I was wondering if it's possible to kind of paint a picture, to talk about your upbringing, and perhaps that's related to how you could bring such a set of unique skills, empathy to your clients, to your team. So
well, I was interested to hear of this, within your previous podcast with Caleb. I was hearing these like kind of like only child stories. So that was that's mostly like my upbringing. Although like I have stepsister now, but mainly like an only child. And both my parents are college professors. One in political science, and the other in like English Lit and Western Civ. So there was a lot of like academic life in the air growing up, and like a lot of like strong perspectives, definitely. And I think I guess definitely the idea of like going like pretty like deep and broad on a subject and kind of like sharing a perspective on it. I guess that does feel like pretty natural to me. So I sort of like at different points in my like professional journey, kind of tried to give myself a course on random subject X, Y, or Z.
Oh, that makes sense. That totally makes sense.
And so just giving yourself a course like on your, now it's more like on a business or on a tool or
So other than UX, you mentioned the other disciplines. What are some of the things interest you besides UX?
I mean, I am a musician and a piano player, and like so definitely like improvisation and jazz and like that's really, I think, a really important like influence because obviously there's especially if you're just like improvising music like on the fly, whether you're doing it like privately or publicly, you're pretty open to like where it might lead.
I did not know that about you, Bob. What is going on?
And you're kind of comfortable just like, I'll sit down and I'll play a song. So that's kind of comfortable, like, we'll sit down and we'll talk about this. So sort of a certain comfort level with like performance or inspiring people to kind of like improvise and feel comfortable with that. And also, there's a certain aspect of like discipline or practice that maybe that wasn't always my strongest suit, like as a piano player. But I think, or like exploration, like making something, like exploring through making or making through exploring. And and I mean, piano, it can be, it can be like a lead instrument or it can be supportive, like in a group. It can be laying down the structure, and it can kind of listen and respond to things. So I think that, that's, an important one. And writing definitely as well. Was doing, interested in like public speaking and writing, and was a newspaper reporter, and sort of trying to quickly learn things, and then like output these these reports about things like rapid fire, so kind of synthesize information, output in a way that can be useful to someone like in their everyday lives and small ways. So, I kind of, the music and the writing, because I still, and sort of the rhetoric, thinking of like an experience is also, it kind of says things that can be summarized. Visuals, say things, interactions say things, maybe not in words, but in other ways, and it's possible to articulate what it's trying to say. That can help people understand what the idea is.
That's mega important, and one of the things I love about this podcast is one excuse is to visit all my friends, to see them again, right? We're not working together anymore. And second is to completely rediscover a person. And I honestly did not know any of this, and I'm sure they're not front and center on your LinkedIn profile either. So I love it. To respect your time, we have just a few minutes left. I want to get a sense for, or have the audience get a sense for the next big or small project you're taking on. And if you can think of any, do you mind maybe, that's answering a question for you, sorry. In the hallway just now, we talked about work bar. And perhaps that's something, if that's what you want to talk about?
Like as I mentioned, I'm in a new job here, a new chapter, which is really exciting. And it's kind of like a hybrid, creative director, UX director position. That's pretty exciting too for me to think about, like, what does that mean, in terms of like kind of bridging between like storytelling and like utility. And then also, there's a lot of exciting things going on at the agency. We have like a new kind of like makerspace, and other folks here. I just showed up. They put this in motion, but this thing called Wonder Bar that's going to open up space within the agency for some startups to kind of work here on their projects, but really see how we might be able to help them primarily with the space, but maybe with some ideas or brainstorm sessions, and really connect the agency to startup world through like osmosis.
And they can tap right into a resource like yourself. How wonderful is that? So this is great. Anything else you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, no, I guess, I just want to come back to your question of like a young person trying to get into UX, and I don't feel like I gave that one, I don't know if I did that one justice, because it's a hard question because people kind of stumble into it, and it's hard to find programs that really seem to sort of like advance like all the different skills, other than things like human computer interaction. But a lot of people have stumbled into it and kind of like actively like made themselves into UXers without necessarily training, just because there's like amazing like range of resources and like thinkers out there like online, or like web courses like through lynda.com on like the tooling, and there's a pretty bustling UX like industry. There's UX meetups here in Boston and other like major like metropolitan areas. And there's starting to be like UX boot camps. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's maybe I can give you some starter resources like offline you could share with this, and that's probably easier than just talking them through. Is just point people to some good links and some good people to help get started.
That would be great. As you see that, create a webpage, a story for every podcast there is. So for Kayla, for Josh Green, and to my audience, we include all the links within, so they don't have to take notes. Last question: how do people find or follow you on the internet?
Good question. I'm on LinkedIn. If you Google, Bob Goodman and UX, and maybe Boston, you're bound to find me. Kind of like carve that out, and I'm on Twitter. I think it's Bob _Goodman. And I have a not very active blog at all. Maybe we'll get back to it. It's called uxculture.com. That's another way to find me, but apologies for it being a bit outdated. But there's some stuff there.
Great.
And those are some of the ways.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for really for doing this, Faye, and for offering this really amazing service to people that are thinking about digital experience and their career or their work life. It's really, really valuable. And
great. Thank you, Bob, for your time. Thank you so much. To listen to more episodes of the Feisworld Podcast, please subscribe on iTunes or visit feisworld.com. That is FEISWORLD, where you can find show notes, links, other tools, and resources. You can also follow me on Twitter @Feisworld. Until next time, thanks for listening.